Dry. Page 66, Chapter 6. Kelton. I decided not to tell my father about the military trucks we saw at our high school. It's not that if I don't think it is significant development, but seeing that we haven't yet been able to get in touch with my older brother Brady, there's no point in rocking the peripheral boat. If we're just going to wait here for him anyway, rather than take off to our bug out in the mountains with my dad, the embers of Armageddon will quickly grow into a full-on blazing apocalypse in his head. He already got that crazy look in his eyes after hearing about the closures of so many school districts, which, by the way, is no tragedy to me. Not that I hate school, it's just that when it comes down to it, I learn more just hanging out at home anyway. I'd probably be homeschooled if either of my parents had the patience to do it. To take my mind off of things, I load up my paintball gun and practice in the backyard. I'm hitting every target on point, and I try to tell myself it's a good omen. The desal rigs down at the beach will do their job. No one will go thirsty. All will be well. My dad steps out on the patio. Don't forget to exhale with your shot, he says. He knows his stuff, and after all, he did spend 12 years in the Marine Corps. My mom likes to make fun of his career as a jarhead, his extraction missions, because technically he worked as a military dentist and never actually left his base. After a few more shots, my CO2 cartridge runs out. I go inside to change it, and right after I finish loading the new cartridge, there's a knock on the front door. My dad answers. It's Roger McCalkey, one of our neighbors. The Mulcalkeys just had a baby, so we never see them much. Actually, we never saw them much before the baby either. We're not exactly social butterflies in our family. 68. How are things going, Roger? My dad asks pleasantly. Don't ask. McCalkey says the car keeps overheating, plus we're having problems with the sewage. Whole house stinks. I hear you, says my dad. You know the Morrows next door had the exact same problem, although he doesn't offer McCalkey any Trapsil liquid. When McCalkey begins to avoid eye contact, my father has no patience for beating around the bush. What can I do for you, Rogers? McCalkey heaves a sigh. It's the baby. Hannah's still able to feed her, but she's getting dehydrated. I'm afraid she won't be able to breastfeed much longer. We have some powder formula, but that's kind of useless without water. I'm sorry to hear that, my dad says genuinely. How can we help? Well, we know you have survival supplies. Hell, everyone knows you've got enough squirreled away in there to survive a apocalypse. Then he laughs nervously, noticing my dad frowning a bit and the word squirreled, as if preparing for the worst is somehow worthy of ridicule. And just then I notice Mikowski's hands are shaking anxiously, like he went over this dialogue in his head 1,000 times and still screwed it up. I know my dad well enough to know that he doesn't give handouts. Plus, once you start giving things away for free, it's a slippery slope. And if there's one thing my dad hates, it's slippery slopes. My dad casually, strategically puts his hand on the door, not to close it, but to give him leverage in case he needs to. The key word there, Roger, is survival. We have just enough to survive. McCalkey takes a moment to regroup his thoughts and tries again. All right, I get it, he says. You have principles and don't want to compromise them, but I'm begging you, Richard, there's got to be something you can do. I mean, the baby. My dad weighs the possibilities. I'm sure I could give you a few pointers, he says. Pointers? My dad motions toward Mikowski's yard. You've got a marvelous garden of succulents. You could grind those up and squeeze at least a gallon out of them. I could even show you how to make a condenser to extract the water. The cactuses? Mikulski laughs, incredulous. My dad smiles graciously. Cacti, he gently corrects. You could have fresh water by tomorrow. Mikulski's smile fades, realizing that my father isn't joking. I have a family to look after. I don't have that kind of time. Well, if you want water, you can make the time. But rather than formulating a response, his eyes narrow and his lips curl with rage. He steps forward, getting into my dad's face. Who the hell do you think you are? But my dad stays cool, collected. Roger, I'm offering you a gift, much more valuable than a bottle of water. Self-reliance. Mikulski's expression darkens, and he gets this strange, wild look in his eyes. You're just going to stand there and let my wife's breast milk dry up? How dare you get angry at me if your lack of foresight is my fault? You're a son of a bitch, you know that? And my dad's done. He doesn't offer fools lightly. He doesn't suffer fools lightly. And to him, anyone who expects others to solve their problems is a fool. Why don't you come back when you're ready to behave like a functioning member of society? He tries to shut the door, but Mikulski lunges forward across the threshold, blocking the door from closing. I should smack that grin right off your face, says Mikulski. Although my dad isn't grinning at all. My dad tries to shoulder him out, but Mikulski has the adrenaline of a desperate man and pushes further. He knocks my father off balance, and the door swings open. That's when I raise my gun, exhale, and pull the trigger 3 times. I shoot Mikulski square in the chest, right on target. The force of the blast blow him back against the door jamb. All his bravado is gone. He wails, thinking he's dying. Then he reaches on his chest and examines the blue phosphorus ooze on his shirt. My heart pounds, probably as much as his. He looks up at me with his forlorn, bewildered look, as if I really had blown a hole in his chest. Then I reach for my backpack hanging on the back near the front door. I cram my arms in and shift around and produce a water bottle I brought to school when it was something I took for granted. I shoved it into his blue dripping hands. Take it and leave, I tell him. Mikulski looks at the bottle of water and goes red in the face, embarrassed, like it wasn't too late for his humanity to suddenly come rushing back. He turns like that and he's gone. In an instant, my dad looks at me, his lip bloodied from the scuffle, now wearing his violently charged expression. And I can't tell if he's just worked up or if he truly disapproves of what I did. Not that I blasted the guy with paint, but that I gave him water. This was none of your business, my father says sternly. You shouldn't have interfered. Yes, sir, I tell him. I know, sir. I always call him sir when he's pissed off at me. Then he closes the door and strides away. The thing is, I'm glad I did what I did. Not just because it has always been a fancy of mine to blast our neighbors with my paintball gun, but because whether my dad knows it or not, I saw this was coming next. What would have happened if I didn't pull my trigger? Because at the apex of the confrontation, my dad's hand had instinctively traveled down to his belt, where his gun was nestled in its holster. Part 2. 3 days to animal. Snapshot. 1 of 3. Activist. Page 75. Camille Cohen has already had a problem with impassive bureaucracy and authority figures. Back in high school, she was extremely vocal in pointing out how hypocrites in the curriculum or inequalities in their disciplinary system, and nothing has really changed now that she's a social ecologist major at the UC Irving. The only difference is now she sees a path to actually changing the world. It really didn't take a genius to figure out that we'd run out of water. If you just read the quarterly public water reports, as she had, the numbers were right there. But to successfully ignore these reports and misdirect people into thinking the problem was under control, that required the mastery of a very special skill set. These were the supervillains Camille hoped to bring down someday, hopefully sooner than later. Weeks before the tap-out, Camille had a protest at the county government office in Santa Ana, backed by the record number of participants, all members of a college student body. But she knew it would take more than one protest. If there was anything her past efforts had taught her, it was that real change requires prolonged pressure and inspired action. Raw, tangible action. Today's action will be inspired by what she sees on the road ahead of her. It begins with a shock followed by rage because cursing ahead of her is a water supply truck owned by one of the various underperforming water municipalities. The 10-gallon bottles stacked in its bed are clearly visible and are let them drink wine sort of slap in the face to the increasingly thirsty population. This truck is delivering water that isn't supposed to exist to some privileged place. It represents every single lie she's been fighting so hard to expose. So rather than continuing west to the desalination center as at the beach, she decides to crank her wheel right and follow the truck. 76, snapshot 2 of 3. David Chen has been an employee of the Orange County Water District for nearly a year now, and lately they've given him increasingly stressful tasks. Today, he's been driving a truck full of drinking water, and riding shotgun is a guy with a shotgun and a bulletproof vest. In fact, they're giving David a vest too, just a precaution. He was told, nothing to concern yourself with, as if he's stupid. The vest is heavy and hot, and no amount of air conditioning in the truck can cool him down. He's sweating in more ways than one. With all the county's water mains on emergency shutdown and endless glitches in the computers trying to redirect what water is left, he's been transporting water manually to high priority facilities. Just yesterday, he drove one of a dozen tanker trucks delivering the contents of a high school swimming pool to Camp Pendleton Marine Base. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and water managers are scrambling to keep the sky from completely falling. It's late afternoon, and David is only on his third delivery of the day. Traffic has been getting increasingly worse, and the GPS apps keep giving everyone the same alternate route, just compounding the problem. Page 77. Current protocol is that all water from municipal water districts will go to hospitals and government facilities first. Federal emergency management will provide relief for private citizen. David already stashed away one of the blue water cooler-sized container for himself and his family. One measly container in the grand scheme of things won't be missed. He considers it unofficial combat pay. It's reclaimed water. That's what they're down to now. All the water that is still in the sewer systems when the water was turned off. All the water that was leaving homes ahead of the tap out and heading back to the Orange County Water District. It's not like they just dumped the water into the ocean. It's purified. Microfiltration, reverse osmosis, ultraviolet radiation, and abracadabra. They turned the county's last day of raw sewage into nearly 50,000 gallons of drinkable water. Of course, no one's supposed to drink it. The policy is that it's only supposed to be used for public irrigation because serving the litigious, finicky public reclaimed water is, no matter how clean it is, would be a public relations nightmare. But no one cares where it comes from as long as it comes. This afternoon's delivery is a critical one. He's bringing water to workers holed up in behind a locked fence of Huntington Beach Power Plant. From what he understands, the plant, which only has about 40 on-site workers, at any given time has become a refuge for Applied Energy Services and Southern California Addition employees. Now there are more than 300 people within its gates, a spontaneous refugee camp of sorts, hence today's delivery. As he pulls off a traffic of that at the Pacific Coast Highway, the plant wavers before him like an ugly industrial mirage, asphalt heat making it shimmer before him. But as he has to halt short of the security gate because someone's standing in his way, preventing him from proceeding. Not an employee, but a girl no older than 20. By the way she's planted her feet, and by the angry, thirsty look in her eyes, he gets the feeling that she's not going to let him pass. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Pacific Highway, on the long trip of Huntington Beach, frustrated crowds waiting for delineation machines have begun to take notice of his truck. Page 78. Snapshot 3 of 3. Plant manager. When Pete Flores was a child, he always wanted to be a magician. As an adult, he found his magic in the manipulation of electrical currents. To him, he couldn't have landed any closer to his original dream, because now, as a power plant manager, he gets to create electricity out of thin air, literally, using natural gas. His Huntington Beach plant produces 450 megawatts of power, which is enough to power nearly 500,000 homes. But for the first time in all of his years here, the station is facing an unprecedented situation. Should he have refused to allow all of his employees safe refuge within the gates of the plant? Should he have refused when other electrical agencies requested sanctuary for their workers? Should he have refused if they asked him to bring their families? Page 79. The Home Office would have refused, not because they were hardened, but because they were so far removed. They didn't see human faces as this crisis. He might be reprimanded for what he did, might even lose his job, but he resolved not to regret it. He accepted the days ahead are going to be increasingly difficult, but the job brings him pride and honor. This is nothing, he thinks, reminding himself of the nuclear plant that melted down in Fukushima, Japan, after an earthquake and a tsunami that followed. Generations flooded and shut down, and the reactors overheated, resulting in total nuclear meltdown. And what did the plant manager do? Rather than fleeing the scene, he decided to stay with his workers in spite of danger, cooling the plant using seawater. It exposed them to lethal levels of radiation, but reduced Japan's nuclear contamination tenfold. That's how you hold the line when you have the fate of millions of lives in your hands. Sometimes being the hero means going down with the ship. As a power plant is considered a critical water priority, Pete's requests for food and water had to be honored, which is exactly why all the families who are currently under his care came. Now he isn't just a plant manager. He finds he's more like a mayor. Is both terrifying and exhilarating. It makes him wonder if public office might be in his future once he gets fired for helping all these people. Today, his turbines are working at full capacity because both the Redondo and the Palomar plants have gone offline. The offline word is that it was a result of employee attrition. Workers just stopped showing up. In a choice between taking care of the plant or taking care of their families during a tap out, they chose their families. It just reinforces for Pete that welcoming his own workers' families was the right decision. Still, the 2 plant shutdowns trouble him. If there are any more, it could cause a cascading failure in the grid, and with so many electrical workers AWOL, there is no telling when such a thing could be resolved. Late in the afternoon, his control room supervisor alerts him that the water truck they've been waiting for all day is at the gate. But there's a problem, he says. Pete is wary. While his job is all about solving problems, the issues he's been facing lately have been a bit out of the wheelhouse. What sort of problem? Maybe you should see for yourself. Most of the security cameras show expected activity on the property, technicians and machinery in restricted areas, and in the non-restricted areas there's numerous guests go about their business. But the cams at the main gate show something else entirely, something that hits Pete like 1,000 volts. There are a dozen of people at the gate, all amassed at the entrance. At first he thinks it's some sort of protest or strange demonstration. There have been plenty of those in this drought climate. But why here? And then he realizes the object of their attention is the incoming water truck, and is totally encircled. This isn't a protest. It's something far more dangerous, more desperate. How many guards do they have on duty? Pete asks the control room supervisor. 3, he answers, including the one at the gate. Get them all down here. Should I call this into the home office? Are you kidding me? Call 911. And then on the screen, the crowd seems to explode into action. All of them, all at once. They're ripping bottles off the truck, smashing the windshield, pulling out the driver. My God, it happened in the blink of an eye. From the passenger seat emerges what looks like a security guard. Is that a gunshot? The man raises it, silently fires into the air, and a second later, Pete hears the delayed report of the gunshot, dull and distant. But the man who fired the gun gets off no more than a warning shot, because the mob rips the shotgun from him and pulls him down into the melee of angry hands. The supervisor dispatches the other guards and begins to frantically call 911, but it's too late because the mob is in a righteous rage. The supervisor dispatches the other guards and begins to frantically call 911, but it's too late because the mob, in its righteous rage, is crashing through the gate and flooding into Pete's planet. And it's more than just a dozen people. It could be hundreds. Helpless plant manager Pete Flores watches the security screen and realizes that, like electricity itself, this mob is a force as dangerous as the Japanese tsunami, and it may be his turn to go down with the ship.